When you wander around Israel, you wander around Palestine, you actually find that a majority of Israelis and a majority of Palestinians want peace, but at the same time you find an even bigger majority of Israelis and Palestinians who tell you that it's not possible.
A new film, Image of the Enemy, focuses on the conflict between Israelis and Palestinians. The film's narrative follows the voices of students, political activists and religious leaders, amongst others. I'm joined in the studio now by the film's director and cinematographer, Leo and Homer. Thanks very much for joining me in the studio today. So Leo, we'll just start off with you. Can you just tell us, as a filmmaker, why did you want to go off and cover this narrative of conflict that's going on in Israel and Palestine?
Sure, yeah, definitely. So Homero and I, our work together dates back to 2011, and we started just building kind of fictional narratives centered around issues of social justice and really to try to present the human condition in that way. Had colleagues overseas in the international community who were interested in doing a project on man-made barriers to health, particularly in the developing world. And they reached out to me and asked if I wanted to produce or collaborate on a project like this. And so that was the first step. We were interested. This was our opportunity to go out into the documentary world and still do what we were passionate about, which was social justice and the human condition. And that's where it started. We started to reach out to experts, both the Israeli and Palestinian experts, to educate ourselves, and took that curiosity and started project development. And that started roughly in March of 2014.
Can you tell us about how your own personal background influenced your decision to make this film?
So Homero and I, we both grew up in Rio Grande City, Texas. That's on the southernmost part of Texas, right on the border of Mexico. This area is riddled with social disparity, one of the highest rates of poverty in the United States, one of the highest rates of health disparity in the United States, one of the highest rates of illiteracy. And it's also, for the past several years, has been on a border of a conflict zone with the Mexican drug cartel violence that's gone on for several years now. And so growing up in these communities, in these societies, I think we became self-aware about what disparity is and how conflict can really devastate communities and culture. And that, I think, is almost at our core of why we do social justice work through film and journalism, and why we do work that revolves around the human condition.
There's a particular theme that maybe connects this idea of conflict, and it's the separation of communities. And back home in Rio Grande City, Texas, and most of us, we have family members in Mexico. And when it comes to conflict, if cartels begin violence, it separates us because we have no access to our families without this fear of our lives or our property. And I think that in a small way may connect to the broader idea of conflict and its implications on dividing communities.
How did you go about getting funding and networking and getting people to participate in the film?
We started one of these Indiegogo pages, as is common for independent filmmakers, and had an outstanding amount of support from our community, our friends, colleagues. And then we self-funded. We invested a lot of our personal finances. The majority of it was from our personal finances to make this project happen, to make it tangible and to make it real, because this is what we're passionate about.
How did you just get access? It can be particularly difficult for independent media in particular to get access to with the West Bank and the Gaza Strip and things like that. So how did you go about getting access to the country?
So I think really establishing relationships is of utmost importance, and I think there's an old saying in global health and in doing these types of projects: nothing about us without us, as they say. And so once we reached out to our experts in the academic world and were introduced to people on the ground, people like Zogby, who runs the WEAM Center right in Bethlehem, we were introduced to him, and we started to establish relationships to learn about his perspective and his narrative and his story. We were introduced to people on the Israeli side as well, who showed us their perspective and their narrative. And over several months, we tried to craft and mold a project, a story worth telling. And so it started with those initial contacts. And I think as the story and the project developed and the trust was established between all parties, really, more people, it was that snowball effect, as they say. More people jumped on board, and we all worked together to collaborate on this project. And we were actually invited to stay with Zogby and his family in the West Bank. So we lived amongst their family and got to learn a little bit more about their condition, and that increased access for us tremendously. And we had access to mostly all the institutions in the West Bank to be able to learn more and to engage and to kind of soothe our curiosity, so that way we could tell this story in a just way. And so essentially that was our in.
And the conflict that is going on between Israel and Palestine is something that, you know, it's world news, and its coverage might, you know, be different in Western society as opposed to how it's portrayed there. I mean, what was your thinking? How are you going to tell this narrative differently than what, you know, the mainstream media was doing?
As journalists and as filmmakers, we have to acknowledge up front that we are riddled with implicit bias, and we have to recognize that up front and to try to minimize that as much as possible after thoughtful consideration and recognition. And so once we were on the ground, to your question about media and what people think about this and how it's portrayed, we were enlightened by many of the Palestinian and Israeli voices about, I suppose, how they were distraught on how the conflict was portrayed, particularly in Western media. And there's a segment in the film where these voices reflect upon that and how they're misconstrued. And so I think one of the most profound, or one of the most poignant statements that one of our voices makes, he talks about how the media prefaces particular populations as terrorists, and that is a word that is used to blanket a lot of the population on a particular side. And so what he tells us is that we aren't terrorists, we're human beings. And to get to your question about what was the goal of the film, it was really to humanize people, to humanize populations and communities living, sharing land and sharing this area. And that was our overall intent, was to have people feel a real human connection with the voices and the pictures that they see on screen. So humanization, I think, was our ultimate goal.
I mean, how trusting were you know, the people who were sitting down in front of the camera and talking? Did they know that you were also talking to the other side of the camp, and did that lead to any mistrust? And I mean, how did that affect the relationship with yourself behind the camera?
I mean, I think it was really up to Leo's ability to connect with these people. It was like he said, developing trust over many months, and I was there to capture the moment. I think everybody knew our project. I mean, we said we were around the country in the West Bank and in Israel, and our goal was just to allow them the screen time to, you know, share their view and to humanize everybody, regardless of their stance on something. We want the viewer to see them and to acknowledge what they're saying, just to hear them out, I would say.
And from the participants, you know, who featured in the film, what solutions were they bringing forward in terms of trying to achieve peace between Israel and Palestine?
Some of the things that we felt were very profound. One of the Israeli voices, Gershon, he talks about at the end, he touches on solutions and how there needs to be a change in the dynamic on how we have discourse and how we have discussions. And what he recommends is, before any mediators, any third-party mediators, any of the major world powers who often intervene in these discussions, he says before that happens, there needs to be a dialogue solely between the Israelis and the Palestinians, without any third parties in the room, that the dialogue needs to be driven and without any other mediators first and foremost before anything gets started. And he calls out many of the world powers, including the United States, to not intervene in a way that's unhelpful, to make any help that these major world powers can do come from a place of bipartisan solidarity from the people involved in conflict, from these communities, for them to reach out together and to establish a safe place of discourse. And so I think before we even get to anything like a solution, we have to establish a way that we interact, the way that we engage one another, and the way we encounter one another.
And the film is entitled Image of the Enemy. Can you tell us your thinking behind that, that title?
Image of the enemy is a sociological concept that describes a negative perception. And this negative perception many times is held by a group and is used to justify violence or oppression against another group. And so this is a global term, an academic term that is used and studied throughout conflicts all around the world.
And Homer, what was your thinking in coming to Northern Ireland and screening the film at Queen's Film Theatre?
It's relevant to Northern Ireland because it's a post-conflict society, and I think our film has universal appeal in this way because I think it's telling to conflict. It's a universal application, the image of the enemy, when it comes to perception and the media and all these elements that are the beginning parts of analyzing what a conflict is, and when it comes to understanding conflict. And I think that's why in this area it could be analyzed with a specific view and understanding.
And so what we hope to accomplish is at the end use this as a global tool, as an academic tool, for us to be self-critical and self-reflective. Maybe we can recognize some of those patterns in our interpersonal dynamics, in our interpersonal conflicts, in our statewide conflicts, in our national and domestic conflicts. So we hope that we can take these lessons and these tools from these voices that have taught us so much and apply it throughout the world.
Thanks very much for taking time in your busy schedule to talk to us today, and I wish you all the best with the future of the film. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
With me here in the studio today is Padraig O'Dinney, who will be talking about the Far Set project, which